people into the room. So give us a minute and everyone will start filtering through. We'll watch those numbers go up and then we'll make a start. Just give it another minute just for a few more people to filter through. Okay, I'm going to make a start. Afternoon, everyone. Thank you ever so much for coming to this webinar. My name's Darren. I am the Inclusion Coordinator for Forward Trust. For the last couple of years, been supporting the LGBTQ plus community, but now looking at other underrepresented and underserved groups, people with disabilities, neurodiversity, people from different ethnic backgrounds, etc. Just going to introduce a bit about the Anti-Stigma Network. I can bring up the script. So the Anti-Stigma Network aims to improve the understanding of the stigma and discrimination experienced by all people affected by drug and alcohol use. Created by a group of organisations with a shared mission, we aim to help coordinate and amplify the huge variety of existing anti-stigma work across the UK, maximising our shared effort to take action to end stigma. We have a broad membership base of people from many different backgrounds and professions, including representatives from local and national governments, charities, treatment providers, emergency services, universities, healthcare workers, and medical professionals and individuals with lived and living experience. We have over 1,000 members and 21 organisational members who represent over 10,000 staff. Our foundations are built on several key principles. We are a non-political party. We are intersectional. We will not frame out any uncomfortable issues. Living and lived experience are centred in our work, but there is a place for everyone. We are humble. This is a journey and there is much to learn and mistakes are inevitable. So this is the fifth in the webinar series facilitated by the Anti-Stigma Network, and you can find others on our website. That will send you a link to YouTube. Feedback from our webinars has been really positive, and we'll continue to measure the impact across all of our webinars, and we'll be happy to share feedback with you. And during this webinar, you will see a link to a feedback form throughout this in the chat function. If you don't mind filling in that feedback, that really helps out and know where we can improve and what we're doing right. We've got some really great speakers with us today, and as with the last one, this is being recorded, so it will go up on YouTube afterwards. If you've got any questions, feel free to put them in the Q&A box down the bottom, and we'll get through to those as quickly as we can at the end session. So everyone will do their presentations, and then we'll do a Q&A session at the end. So on our last session, we had a few suggestions and ideas about how services and organisations can improve their support and visibility to the LGBTQ community, whether that's wearing a rainbow lanyard, having posters up within your services for dedicated LGBTQ plus support groups, and hopefully those groups would be run by someone within the community. And we also spoke about attending Pride events, and I think getting to Pride events is has a huge impact within the community. I think most people are aware that lots of large organisations splash rainbows over their products and their businesses just for the month of June. and then don't support us for the rest of the year. So it's really important getting to Pride events and showing the dedicated support you have for the community all year round, not just for June. Hopefully you'll pick up some good information today. There's a lot of it, so you might need to watch it back again. But like I say, there is a Q&A session at the end, so you're more than welcome to send your questions in or raise your hand at the end. So our first speaker today is Kate Ashfield Fox. Kate is Head of Equality, Diversity and Inclusion at With You. Kate has led on equality, diversity and inclusion strategy in the third sector organisations that operate in the criminal justice system and health and social care sectors. She has also delivered LGBTQ+ training to private, public and third sector organisations across the UK. As a gay woman, Kate is passionate about raising awareness of the barriers to LGBTQ+ people accessing vital services and empowering allies to address these barriers in their day-to-day practice. So with that, I'll hand over to you, Kate. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Darren. And yeah, lovely to, well, I would say see everybody. We can't see because it's a webinar, but we know some people signed up to this, which is amazing to see that people are so passionate about understanding what those barriers are and really trying to genuinely tackle them as well. So I've got a couple of slides, and if anybody wants any more information around what's included in those, please do feel free to reach out to me after today as well. But as kind of Darren said, my name is Kate. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm going to be doing a little bit of a whistle-stop tour from like a With You perspective, organizationally, and also kind of from my own personal experience as well. So I think first of all, what I really wanted to do, and a lot of these statistics might be familiar to people on the call, they might not be, but I guess just talking a little bit through the context and reality of what is still the lived experience of many LGBTQ+ people across the UK in 2025 when we're thinking about healthcare more broadly, and then kind of thinking about drug and alcohol and substance use specifically. But when we think about kind of healthcare in general, we still know there are a range of barriers to accessing just routine treatment, healthcare that isn't related to our identity or specific needs, just more generally. But then also when we think about the specific needs of LGBTQ+ people as well, that adds kind of compounding elements. So the statistics on the slide from a report from the LGBTQ+ organisation Stonewall is a couple of years old now, but sadly what we know is that picture hasn't changed drastically necessarily by any means. And kind of the two numbers included on the slide, one relates to LGBT people, and then the one in italics relates to trans communities specifically, again because LGBTQ+ communities are not a homogenous group. There are very distinct differences in experience. And sadly, especially for our trans non-binary kind of siblings, what we know is that especially in a healthcare context, that stigma and discrimination is particularly compounded over recent years, and especially kind of in recent months as well. And what we see is kind of that unequal treatment, inappropriate curiosity, being outed without consent, which again, I think I'm pretty sure, hopefully everybody on the call can understand why that is wrong. And it sounds like such a basic, simple thing, but actually it is so, so important. Somebody's identity is sensitive personal information. And if somebody's trusted you with that and felt safe with you, you would need to honor that and make sure that you only ever pass information on where relevant, and if you have that consent as well. Anti-LGBT remarks, and also staff lacking understanding of those specific needs. So a really small, it sounds a really small example, and I always give to people is I, as a gay woman, was told multiple times when I was younger, I didn't need a smear test. That's not true in any way. It really puts people at risk. So it sounds like a really small thing, but as I said, this kind of lack of understanding or nuance of LGBTQ+ experiences actually has massive long-term ramifications for people's health and well-being. So it's, as I said, it's not just about Pride, it's not about 1 month, it is really about understanding those specific needs. And I think trying to bring it, I guess, further into the context of kind of drug and alcohol, what we're focusing on today, I think especially speaking to the fact that trans non-binary people still have, very understandably, a huge level of concern around accessing kind of transition-related healthcare being stopped if they access mental health, drug or alcohol support. So I think it's kind of just holding some of these very startling facts, I guess, as the start to this conversation of that we have come an incredibly long way in terms of LGBTQ+ equality and rights, but also we've seen several steps back, and that we are still kind of sadly quite a long way from true full access, inclusion and equality for all groups across kind of LGBTQ plus communities, especially thinking about that intersectional lens. And in addition, again, just I guess as kind of context or background information, which again might be familiar to lots of people on the call, but again, I think it's just helpful for us to frame our thinking when we're having these conversations around, well, what are those complex needs, or what are kind of some of those specific distinct barriers and elements that mean that somebody might be far less likely to engage with drug and alcohol services while simultaneously actually really, really needing them. And I think that's the crux for me always has been that actually LGBTQ plus people have quite often been either erased or not visible within this space, despite the fact that we know kind of traumatic experiences, complex needs mean that actually people's relationships with drugs and alcohol within our community are very complex and therefore are kind of very, very likely, and if anything, should be overrepresented, sadly, in the treatment population. And that just isn't what we see at all, which means we know we're not meeting the need. So I won't kind of run through all of it or talk through them, but half of LGBT people report experiencing depression in the last year, with 3 in 5 reporting experiencing anxiety in the last year. And both of those figures understandably increase if you have experienced a hate crime or hate incident, which again, we have seen kind of reports suggesting that incidents of hate crime have increased. Some of that is down to reporting, but also some of it is down to a range of other factors as well in terms of kind of media narrative and more broadly as well. 1 in 10 LGBT people have experienced domestic abuse from a partner in the past year, including 1 in 5 trans people specifically. Almost 1 in 5 LGBT people have experienced homelessness at one point in their lives. And again, thinking about that intersection, sadly, of what we know in terms of drugs, alcohol, homelessness, we would therefore expect to see more LGBT people in those homeless outreach projects, for example, potentially. And that isn't necessarily always the case. And lastly, risks of kind of conversion therapy and subsequent links to poor mental health. And so just in case nobody is aware, so conversion therapy refers to a variety and range of different practices that effectively try to make an LGBT person not LGBT. And that is still legal in this country in 2025. And I'm sure I'm not the only one who thinks that's absolutely wild. There's been an ongoing consultation to try to ban it, and that is still a work in progress. But again, in terms of thinking about risk factors and those complex needs of a community, these are just very top level. We could spend probably a whole afternoon talking through even more of those. And it is that nuanced understanding that actually means we can build genuine therapeutic relationships with people that need our support, that isn't just tokenistic or isn't just based around a said kind of like an image of a rainbow, for example, which can be really powerful when backed up with meaningful understanding of what's happening in those people's lives as well. But I'm always really mindful of not kind of painting one picture of LGBTQ plus communities' relationships with drugs and alcohol, because I think what we know historically and still, especially within media representation, we tend to have like a very polarizing kind of stereotyped view of that either people's relationship is purely a trauma response because of potentially a really negative experience when they came out, or complete hedonism, this kind of party lifestyle, and it's either or, when in reality, what many of us know and we see in kind of the treatment population is it's a bit of both. It's complex and it looks completely different for a range of different people. That obviously kind of the history of the modern LGBTQ plus rights movement started at the Stonewall Inn, which was a bar, which was a space that was criminalized and centered around alcohol and drugs and was a safe haven for huge amounts of people and created a huge sense of community, which is still the case for lots of LGBTQ plus venues, which is amazing. But at the same time means that sadly kind of drugs and alcohol have often just been a background sound to the LGBTQ plus community. And that in itself can bring really complex challenges in terms of navigating how do I keep those connections with community, or how do I continue to explore that sense of identity or sociability if that's something that has supported me in the past, for example. So again, I think it's trying to make sure that we're aware of those complex needs, experiences, but that also, like with all harm reduction related work, isn't it, of being like, some people want to have a really good time, and it is a really good time, and it supports them to explore parts of their identity. And we just need to help people to make the most informed decisions that they can do, but doing so in a way that honors people's identities and experiences rather than just assuming that everybody's need is exactly the same. And kind of with you, that's very much been the approach that we've been trying to focus around. And as always, this is very much a journey. We are still working to get this right, and to find that kind of right balance. But I think we've really been trying to think about, what does meaningful harm reduction look like for LGBTQ plus people, and how can you really lean into being explicitly and vocally inclusive, rather than kind of, as I said, referring to certain substances but actually not saying, we know these are particularly prevalent in the party scene, or we know that these are related to chemsex. Use the words, be vocal, talk about those specific experiences. That's the only way that we can really challenge that stigma. Some of the work we've been trying to do through kind of social media and content, again, I think is really around just trying to create those initial touch points and showing that we are vocal, visible, inclusive, but also empowering people to make those decisions for themselves, as I said, of being like, here's the information, you can make those choices. It really is that harm reduction approach as a whole. And that, again, whether that's around kind of helping people to stay safe at a Pride event, or whether it's throughout the rest of the year talking around specific substances, or kind of interactions of substances, for example, of just trying to empower and enable people to make those decisions. And something that we found really beneficial, kind of goes hand in hand, I guess, with that approach, is kind of virtual support, or what with you, we provide like a web chat service that's available, which means that people can engage entirely on their own terms, how they want to, without that fear that, again, sadly, because those statistics we spoke about at the start, we know many LGBTQ plus people carry, of being like, am I going to be treated differently? Are you going to understand my needs? Is it safe to say actually who I am, what my experiences and what my needs are? And what we find is that, as is often the case in a virtual world, isn't it? It takes away some of that kind of fearfulness, and actually people feel potentially empowered to say exactly where they're at, to ask those questions that they want answers to, because it feels impersonal and because it can be that confidential space in many ways. In a sense, so that can make it maybe feel lower risk for people, because they're like, I can just put it all out there and ask all the questions. And we had at various different points trialed kind of LGBTQ plus specific hours to try to create that designated space, which is really helpful. But I think what we actually long term came to find was that, especially with a service like web chat, where it's supposed to kind of be that first door in, that actually you want that first door to be open all the time. You don't want somebody to have to wait, oh, it's 3 p.m. on a Thursday that will meet your need. So again, I think a bit like Darren spoke about at the start, it's having that variety of options of like designated spaces where people can talk to those that have had similar experiences, led by and for LGBTQ plus people, is incredibly powerful. But we also need to have that front door being open, and again, being visible and being vocal and saying, come through, find out the information, build that trust. And then you can maybe begin to kind of see somebody move into in-person services, let them know about the LGBTQ plus specific drop-ins or support groups that you're running kind of in that local service as well. And unsurprisingly, like I said, given the context of what we know about people's fearfulness and kind of some of the elements that reduce those barriers around web chat, what we do see basically is a much, much higher proportion of LGBTQ plus people seeking support there than we do in in-person treatment, which I think really tells us something, and for all of us across the sector to think about, in terms of how we meet people where they're at. That obviously we'd love overnight for it to be, no, we're inclusive, please come to us. But we need to remember there are decades and decades of shame and stigma and fear being carried by people, that they will be treated differently, even if you've got your flags out, even if you've gone to Pride. If you've had a negative experience in the past, or even just from others, you've heard those stories, that carries, and that's a real kind of community-based trauma, realistically, that many people do have, of just being like, that space isn't for me. So trying to find, as I said, other ways of engaging can be really powerful. But so roughly around, I said, 20% of web chat users identify as LGBTQ+, which one is obviously way above the census, 6% estimated. In terms of kind of the treatment population, we don't really get sexual orientation data declared, so it's very hard to give a comparison. But I think a lot of us that work in the sector can say that's certainly higher than what we see in-person services, or at least what people feel able to disclose. And 92% of those people were accessing support for the first time. So like I said, in terms of being that kind of first door, that first point of engagement, that's really powerful. And in terms of kind of what people were presenting with, LGBTQ LGBTQ+ web chat users are 17% more likely to seek support for drug use than alcohol, in comparison with around 6% of non-LGBTQ+ people. So again, actually understanding what those needs look like, what does that harm reduction information look like, has been really helpful in kind of giving us that steer going forwards as well. And this is just kind of a excerpt from one of the chats that somebody had, which was, I didn't think this service was for people like me, but this chat felt different. You support me even if I'm making terrible choices to stay safe and know my options. And I think, again, that's kind of the ethos, I guess, that we're trying to put out, and I would actively really encourage for everybody else as well. And I said, obviously, harm reduction is not new in this sector by any means, but I think it's trying to apply that lens and thinking about how do we tailor this to meet those specific needs, to meet people where they're at, and that will save lives, and we know that. And in terms of kind of some of the learning, I guess we found that using that affirming non-clinical language is really important, and that treating identity as a strength rather than either a problem or something to get embarrassed or scared to ask about is so powerful. So often kind of somebody's community relationships obviously is a massive part of their kind of recovery capital. So why would we lean away from that? We need to kind of learn to lean into and kind of empower all of our staff, including those that don't identify as LGBTQ+, to be able to have those conversations and hold that space for people as well. But as I said, obviously being visible and vocal is really important in terms of building that trust. But training staff appropriately from day one is also a massive, massive part of that. As I said, obviously, we can't expect everybody to be experts in everything, but it is about, I said, understanding some of that nuance around the context of LGBTQ+ people's lives, understanding some of those barriers and some of the specific harms they might be experiencing as well. I'm really mindful of time and how many other speakers there are. And I do talk at 100 miles an hour. But just to give, I guess, a bit of a closing sense, and kind of, I guess, taking off my like with you hat and more of the like my personal experience, I think I feel very passionately, as I said, about talking to the intersectional experience of LGBTQ+ people, that we are not one homogenous group that all have the same needs, as is nobody else within kind of the treatment population as a whole. And I think obviously what we know is that cis straight women experience a range of barriers to accessing treatment currently. And obviously that is exactly the same for LGBTQ+ women as well. But often many of those barriers are compounded, or that sense of invisibility can be even stronger and even greater, because very understandably, much of the conversation in space around supporting women centres around women's experiences of violence from men, very rightfully so, because that's a huge part of the trauma that many have experienced. But for lots of queer women, maybe that isolates them. They feel that's not a space for them to be able to access support or to talk about their experiences more generally. And in LGBTQ+ spaces, often women have been hidden or their voices haven't been heard. So you kind of find this odd space where like, it doesn't feel like anybody fits in anywhere, and there's nowhere for my voice specifically. So as always, I think it's thinking about the diversity within the diversity and thinking about how can we hold those spaces and make them truly accessible and inclusive for everybody. Because I certainly, growing up, the word lesbian was just a horrible taunt that you heard on the playground. And if you grow up in that environment thinking the word that I think maybe I am is just what's used to bully other people, and to tell them they're not cool, and that's the worst thing, unsurprisingly, has a really strong impact on your mental health and well-being as you're growing up. And then trying to find spaces where you feel like you fit in, obviously alcohol, other substances can quite easily become a crutch for that, or to try to find those spaces where you fit in. And again, I think that narrative we have of that, oh, it's 2025, everybody's coming out younger now, it's a safe space. And it is for lots of people increasingly, and that is amazing. But for lots and lots of people, isolation from family, breakdown in family relationships, online hidden harms, for example, risks of conversion therapy, are still massive, massive risks, as I said, especially for young people, and that plays out into adulthood as well. So I think something I also just feel really passionately about is advocating for and considering what does this mean for our young people services, especially in terms of thinking about how do we lay that foundation of support and again empowering people to know how to make informed decisions about keeping themselves safe whilst honouring their identity and that kind of nuanced experience that LGBTQ+ people have as a whole as well. But I said I will leave it there, and I'm really happy to pick on those questions at the end as well.
Thanks ever so much, Kate. Just so much to unpack there, and your figures kind of reflect what we see within Forward as well. And that lack of understanding by organisational staff is huge. You know, and like you say, if you've been to a service, being a LGBTQ plus person, being a queer person, if you go to a service and have had discrimination or bad treatment, you're hesitant to then go back into another service, and it really does. So having staff having a basic understanding of the specific needs within the community as a whole, but then each sort of demographic, just a basic need. You don't need in-depth need, just basic staff training is huge. And the homelessness thing, you know, 1 in 5 experiencing homeless is a scary figure. I myself was homeless, street homeless, and sofa surfing for years, and you know, like you say, again, you don't see those people represented within homelessness services either. And the web chat, just recognizing that we have our web chat called Reach Out, and very similar story there. People reach out far easier, and it is an easy in to the door for people to access support and service and know what to expect when they do walk into a service like With You or Forward or what have you. So yeah, thank you ever so much. We've got a couple of questions there already, and we'll get round to those at the end of the session. Thanks again, Kate. So I don't get on with my very vocals glasses. So we're going to move on to the next speaker, which is Ben Kay. Ben is a humanistic counsellor, MSc psychology student, and passionate advocate for LGBTQIA plus mental health, addiction recovery, and stigma reduction. Drawing on both professional expertise and lived experience, Ben has spent the past 8 years challenging systems of exclusion and supporting people who are often overlooked by mainstream services. Ben's work has been nationally recognised. In 2021, he was named one of Attitude Magazine's 101 LGBTQ plus trailblazers, nominated for the LGBTQ plus Role Model of the Year at the National Diversity Awards, and awarded the High Sheriff of Dorset Award for his contributions to queer communities across the Southwest. He has designed and delivered inclusive mental health and substance provisions for services, launched the UK's first LGBTQ plus recovery web chat, and regularly trains professionals on chemsex, trauma, and inclusive practice. Today, in addition to full-time employment for National Drug and Alcohol Charity, Ben runs his own private therapy practice in London. Amazing. So with that, we'll hand over to Ben. Thank you.
Cheers, Darren. Thanks very much. That's a great introduction. I don't need to say anything else, do I really? Thank you very much. Let me share my screen so we can get started. It's really lovely to be here. Really, really grateful to be here in this space with some really brilliant professionals. And thank you to everyone joining the call and joining the webinar. So after that introduction, I don't need to talk about who I am and what I do, but I'm coming to you today under the guise of Ben K Therapy, which is my private practice of what we do. Why are we here today? Just in case anyone forgets. So substance misuse exists in all communities, but it hits LGBTQIA plus people differently. We know that for a fact. Shame, silence, and exclusion from services increases the risk of those involved. Sure. And we are here to change that together. It's an ongoing conversation and it's going to continue for a long, long time. But the fact that we're having these conversations is what is the most important thing right now. Let me give you a bit of a case study to get things started. We've talked to you about someone who was using substances from the age of 15 years old following an acrimonious divorce at the parents' home, coming from an idyllic childhood, having everything they ever wanted, privately educated, to their life being completely flipped upside down, turned 180 at the age of 15 years old. Privately educated, but taken out of education at the age of 15 to care for a sick parent, and their life completely changed. The trajectory of their life changed. However, they worked in property for 20 years, but had a very successful career. An associate member of the RICS, which is the Royal Institute of Chartered Surveyors. So was very good at that job, but never really liked it in its entirety. It wasn't ever what they really thought they wanted to do. So taking substances right the way, again, reiterating, from the age of 15 years old. They moved to South London in 2002, about the early 20s. And what started off as weekend use quickly escalated to include chems, those substances associated with chems and chemsex, crystal methamphetamine, GBL, GHB, and/or methadone in and around 2010. Those that don't know what chems are or chemsex, we can circle back and talk about that a little bit later. It was the recreational use that really filtered over into the week. The person was highly functioning. Following some further trauma where the person was groomed and cuckooed, emotionally, physically, and financially abused, this person's substance misuse, substance misuse escalated to around 3 to 4 grams of crystal weekly, and 15 to 20 mils of GBL daily. The person identifies as a gay man, coincidentally. The person suffered a huge breakdown in 2017. And when they were seeking support from services, no one understood what safeguarding, no one raised any safeguarding concerns or any risks that was associated with the people that were living in their house. They were offered police support, but just basically flipped from being victim to perpetrator very, very quickly. When the drugs that were found in their house, they were arrested for possession with intent to supply, but they were actually released with a caution with the drugs they had in their pockets to keep them going because they were actually in active addiction. So this person's life literally went from, up here to down here in a very short amount of time, but the period of using it was 22 years. After trying to engage with drug and alcohol services, when they walked through the front door of a drug and alcohol service in South London, no one understood what meth was, GBL or GHB and or methadone were. It was in 2017 in central London. So this was a real barrier for this person accessing treatment. Had to educate the people they were working with right the way through the process in order to get them what they needed. And what they knew they needed was rehab, a stint in rehab. Finally entered rehabilitation in 2017. And they were in treatment for 3 months and then supported accommodation for a subsequent 7 months, unable to function in society given the trauma and everything they've experienced. And every time they had to enter into a treatment system, they had to re-explain what that trauma was because no one really understood chems, again, substances involved with chems, and the lifestyle that came with it. The person was diagnosed with severe CPTSD, depression and anxiety. They lost all of the back of their hair through alopecia, their property career, the life slipped through their fingers like quicksand, lost their home, lost their friendships, lost their relationship. Everything they knew didn't exist anymore. And they were then relocated back down to the south coast, and they stayed on the south coast of the UK from 2017 until very recently. They had to relocate down to the south coast due to safety because of all the fears that were going surrounding all the police investigations, but all the charges were dropped. They decided to drop the charges when they left treatment. They weren't believed by the local police forces. They weren't taken seriously because this person was using substances really dangerously and or being fed these substances. No one really believed it wasn't the fault of the person using these drugs. The person's now back in London and in sustained recovery. So it's a bit of a whistle-stop tour of a nightmare time and experience for this person accessing treatment in a central London service. That was my story. Recovery lit my path. Advocacy gave me direction. My main objective now, and always has been since I came into recovery, is to ensure that no one else is turned away or shamed when seeking help from our community. The journey does continue, and it basically went from property to purpose. I carved out a career in drug and alcohol services, working for a national drug and alcohol services, walked through the front door of a drug and alcohol service when I came out of treatment looking for an LGBTQ recovery group. They didn't have one in the southwest of the country. So I launched the first LGBTQ recovery group, the charity I was working for at the time, and it became extremely popular really quickly. And then from working in the property sector, deciding this could potentially be my new career, I feel like I've really found my calling. Qualified as a humanistic counsellor in 2022, went on to subsequently complete a degree 2 years ago, a BA in humanistic counselling. So as a diploma in therapy, humanistic counsellor, I'm now studying psychology masters. I was the local and national EDI leader at We're With You. I launched the UK's first national LGBTQ+ web chat that you may have heard previously on this call. I created a drop-in clinic with sexual health Dorset. What I was doing was, at the time, was I realised that the barriers and the gaps that were in the services that I found, I didn't want anyone to ever feel the way that I felt. It was the most hideous landing into services. So moving away from London, I knew what was happening in really good postcodes, central London postcodes. But it's a postcode lottery. fall out of the you come away from someone that offers an LGBTQ support or someone that doesn't understand the language, you really are up against it. And I knew that there were some really great CHEMS clinics that were happening in central London. So I took them on. I didn't reinvent the wheel. I picked up the model and I brought it down to Dorset, and I collaborated with Sexual Health Dorset with an amazing organisation called Over the Rainbow. And it was a very, very exciting project that I'm really, to this day, it was one of the, I'm very proud of. And I really enjoyed the relationship that we created. I heard that I was awarded an LGBTQ Role Model of the Year award, and it wasn't anything. I was blown away when I was nominated for this, because quite simply, I was recognising that the issues that people were facing outside of central London, I thought we were so far. When 2017, when I started to access treatment, I actually thought it was going to be easy for me to do, and it really, really wasn't. Coming outside of central London and a major city made it even more difficult. So what I did was take things away from central London and major cities and move it across to the southwest of the country. One of the things I created and pulled together in October 2023 was a ChemSex masterclass. What that included was engaging with all of the sexual health and HIV commissioners and drug and alcohol commissioners across the country. Pilot that I'd launched in BCP, Bournemouth, Christchurch and Poole, educate all of the commissioners across the country as to what ChemSex was, what the problem is, you even know what it is. And over 230 commissioners landed on that call, and over 50% of those didn't know what chemsex was. There was the problem. How are we going to break down barriers and reduce stigma when people don't understand what people are talking about when they enter treatment? You've got to be very lucky from experience to gain someone or have someone, a key worker in front of you that understands what you're bringing to the table, especially when it comes to LGBTQ specific support, and even further the nuances associated with chems and chemsex. I helped write and co-create the clinical guidance and detoxification pathway for a national alcohol charity, again, very recently, because it didn't have that. So again, I'm questioning, you're walking through the front door of a national drug and alcohol charity, and they may or may not even understand what drugs you're using. Doesn't make sense. And I'm not here for 1 second to say that colleagues across the sector, in every single direction, I've seen it firsthand, I've lived that job, I know what it feels like. But how can services profess to support people with substance misuse, don't understand the substances that are being brought to the front door? Which is why soft landing into services are really, really important. And in education. There's nothing wrong with not knowing. It's all about the education. How can we educate ourselves and just learn from each other? I helped launch the CHEMS NSP Direct to Home pilot with the National Drug and Alcohol Charity. I was a project lead, actually, which was really exciting again, across 2 sites across the UK, in BCP and in Liverpool, where people were landing onto our web chat service. We knew the members of the chemsex community, through our own research, didn't want to access drug and alcohol services. They found it very difficult to walk through the front door, because lots of this cohort are fully functioning, highly functioning, and have high-powered jobs and professional careers. So we were advertising, and we piloted people accessing our web chat facility and ordering clean injecting equipment and compartmentalization advice, specifically in areas across the country. Before I left the organisation, it was rolled out nationally. Really exciting place to be in. Again, is it accessed? People know about it enough? Is it pushed as much as I'd like it to be? As in a Benkei capacity, but no, we started somewhere. And the conversations are out there, and it's about organisations really buying into this and understanding that there are people out there that need support, don't know where to go. A bit of a stuck slide here. There we go. So here's some statistics. Really loudly. Here are some statistics. Between May 2023 to December 2023, appreciate that's not so long ago, there's a 367% increase in CHEMS clients that were accessing the services across BTP. That's because we created pathways, drop-in clinics, web chat facilities, changed the way that people access services. It isn't 2 DNAs and then you're closed. How can we meet you where you need to be and ensure you get the support you want? Tier 2 intervention is Tier 2 enough, i.e. light touch intervention. Tier 3 intervention, what does the client want, as opposed to we're asking them to conform to what we expect them or expect of them. These were my experiences when I access services, and that's what one of my gambits, one of my ethoses now is I really want to help change the way that members of my community access services, specifically those that are using chems. So what still needs to change? Stigma reduction is everyone's responsibility. It isn't just the members of the LGBTQIA plus community at all. It's everyone's responsibility. So we need to move from pathologizing really to a deeper understanding. And when I mean that, when I say that, it's actually people's experiences as signs of a dysfunctional illness. That isn't the case. Right? Let's understand what's going on with these people. Let's understand what the internalized homophobia look like, minority stress looks like. How can we bring these into therapeutic spaces where we're offering psychosocial and psychosexual interventions? Services need training, compassion, and flexibility. One thing about our sector that we work in, frontline services are very, very transient. Training the whole frontline staff on chemsex and or LGBTQ plus stigma, in 6 months' time, it's going to be 25% of the people that you initially trained. So it isn't tokenistic, it needs to be all the time. Sometimes I question if mandatory training, specifically when it comes to LGBTQIA plus community and chem, should happen on a quarterly basis, not a monthly basis. Everyone needs to have everyone as up to date as they possibly could be. Just food for thought, though. This is my thought process. Representation really matters. Staff, language, and pathways. I wasn't supported by a member of the community when I accessed the service in London. He was on maternity leave and he was the chems lead. That's why no one understood what was going on, because he was on leave. That didn't sit right with me when I and that my journey evolved and continued. Language is really important too. If people that are accessing services and treatment, if you don't mirror the language that's being used, or they don't think they're understood metaphorically or physically, the chances are they won't come back. I accessed the drug and alcohol service in Lambeth. The 5th time I tried to gain access, I got in. The first 4 times I was told to come back. I was pushed out of the queue. I was too late to join the queue. That's what I faced. I knew it was my lifeline in order to get in. And I was either going to, a very severe mental health issue, which I did have before my breakdown, or alternatively, I just wasn't going to. And the pathways are really, really important. Access points into services are really, really important. Whether it's online, drop in, over the phone, anonymous, keep it as easy and as simple as possible, and make it as user-friendly, client-focused, person-centered as we possibly can. So, a quote from me: "I'm committed to reducing stigma, raising awareness, and reshaping access support for LGBTQIA plus communities and those involved in chems." My ongoing work continues as I'm training local and national services, elements of consultancy, supporting peers in recovery. I wouldn't be where I was unless someone gave to me what they did back then across the board. Sharing my stories to break shame. I don't like to sit in lived experience. About, oh, look at my story, look what I went through. But this is my journey, this is my truth. And if my journey and my truth can really help that other person step forward, I will constantly share it and constantly shed light on it, just really to reduce the shame and allow people to step forward. Advocating for inclusive and culturally competent care is a must, of course, and helping to drive systemic change in mainstream services. It can't happen overnight. It doesn't happen overnight, which is why these small changes, as Kate spoke about previously, are really, really important. It's the small wins that we need. So often we see people taking on the system or taking on these larger elements. Let's just do what we can do and do it well at grassroots level. And hopefully we'll get enough people in the right places to listen, and we can drive change together from the top and the bottom. Final reflections. Substance misuse is not a moral failing. Every story holds power, especially the ones we're taught to hide. Listen better, act braver, and lead with compassion. Thank you very much.
Thanks ever so much, Ben. Really appreciate you coming on. It's so much, again, we can recognise there. And the big takeaways for me is a lack of understanding amongst a supposed support service amongst the staff around LGBTQ plus issues, and representation within the staff, like you say, people who have that lived experience, who have a real understanding of what you've gone through, because it is tiring going into a service, whether it's mental health, substance use services, whatever, and explaining your story over and over again and people still not getting it. So having that understanding and representation. And I always think that if you don't see yourself within a service, represented within a service, that service isn't for you. So, you know, I think organisations can do more, should do more to enhance their LGBTQ plus staff, and then that will bring in the clients, help bring in the clients. And the thing, ask what the client wants. It's an easy thing. It's an easy thing, but it's not often asked. You know, the clients are often told what they should be doing, but you know, we've got to meet them at where they're at and ask them what they want and what direction they want to go in. Thank you, Ben. And again, any questions, please put in the Q&A box and we'll come to those at the end. Thanks again, Ben. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Okay, we're going to move on to our third speaker, Vernon. Vern founded Trans Sober in 2022 after living drug and alcohol free for 4.5 years, now with over 7 years of lived experience. Vernon created the service they wish had existed when they began their journey, one that truly understands the unique challenges faced by trans, non-binary and genderqueer people around drug and alcohol use. As a trans person living with a learning disability and chronic health conditions, Vern often felt the need to hide parts of themselves in traditional support spaces. While some groups were helpful at first, none fully addressed the intersectional experiences that shape the LGBTQI+ community's relationship with substance use. Vernon needed space where they could be fully seen, understood, and where others like them could connect, heal, and grow. Trans Sober was born from that need. Starting with just their own story, Vernon built a diverse community of people from the community who live drug and alcohol free, ranging from those in secure housing and employment to those who've experienced homelessness and addiction. What unites them is a shared passion for supporting others in the LGBTQ+ community wherever they are on their journey. Excellent. And we'll hand straight over to you, Vernon. Thanks.
Hi, yes. Sorry, I don't have any slides, so it's just me talking. As Darren's just said, then that I've been sober now for over 7 years, but I found when I was getting sober, there just wasn't the service that met my needs, and I went to several groups and stuff, which were all really good, but I felt like I could either have my community or I could be sober, and I couldn't have the both. And when I was in services, I felt like in groups and stuff, I felt like I couldn't talk about and express what I needed to, because the people just didn't understand it, because it wasn't their lived experience, you know. And some, you can empathize and support, but you can't really sort of understand something unless for it's your lived experience. So when I'd been sober for about 3 years, 3, 4, I can't remember what Darren said, but I decided to set up Trans Sober, which was just originally going to be a peer support group where trans, non-binary, genderqueer people could get together. We don't have a criteria. We just say if you feel the service in the group is for you, then you're welcome. There's no tick box criteria. And also what I found in some services and support groups and stuff, they only stick to one thing. It's either got to be alcohol related or it's got to be drugs related. It can't cross over. And for a lot of people, especially within the LGBTQI+ community, that does mix. You know, some people drink too much alcohol and take recreational drugs while they're using alcohol, you know. So it is very diverse. And sometimes you go to a service and say, oh no, we can only talk about alcohol, we can only talk about drugs. And sometimes you need to talk about your life, which is everything together. So I set Trans Sober up, and from there, you know, it's just a very small service, which is peer support led. But over the last 3 years, we've done some amazing things. We have our weekly peer support groups that I'm actually having a break from at the moment running them, but they'll be back up and running soon. So I want something weekly so people could build it into your routine, because what I found was some people do LGBT services, but it's like the last Friday of every month. It's a bit what Kate said at the beginning. It's at a Pacific time on a Pacific day, and it's only like one, I don't know, the last Friday of every month or something, you know, or the first Tuesday. So there wasn't some, and sometimes when you've got drug and alcohol problems, you need to act upon it when you're ready to act upon it. Sometimes going, oh well, I've got to wait 3 weeks now till there's the next group. It's too late. It's not there. So I wanted something that people could build into their routine, and it was weekly. It wasn't sort of like a monthly thing or every so much. So the peer supports came from that, and then from that, people wanted things to do. So we started doing we managed to get some funding, and we now do sober socials and events. We've done 2 sober clubbings, and we've got another one coming for Trans Pride. It's going to be the first sober clubbing at Trans Pride Brighton. This year we did an art exhibition last year where we had sober artists from the trans, non-binary, gender queer community from all over the world exhibit different arts in different formats around their relationships with drugs and alcohol. We teamed up with Zest Psychology and did some research, because what we found is, again, there's lots of LGBT research, but it only touches, maybe you might have one line about trans, non-binary, gender queer people in it. The 95% of it is going to be around LGB, and it's just, and there are some unique differences within the community and people's lived experiences. So as I said, we teamed up, and the research is on our website, so you can have a look at that. And again, it's just a very simple, easy bit of research for them people to look at it and then go on and do their own research. I've worked with lots of other services. They've reached out to me to talk about how they can become more inclusive. You know, I think Kate and Ben have both talked on this about services not knowing how or what to do. I recently had a meeting with a drug and alcohol service in a large part of London who were trying to improve engagement because they had a new worker there who's part of the LGBT community and went through all the data, 2 years worth of data, and they'd not had one trans, non-binary, genderqueer person in their service in 2.5 years. So they want to know how come, you know, we know there's a big drug and alcohol problem within that community, within the area we are, but they're not accessing our services. You know, I've gone over 2 years worth of data and there's not one person. You know, we've had people come through our service. We had someone who was doing some drug and alcohol counselling. They were on session 6 of 8 sessions. They flippantly mentioned being non-binary, and the counsellor stopped the session there and then and said, "Oh, I don't know how to deal with non-binary people. I can't work with you." They were on a 6th session of 8, and it wasn't a problem. What they were having counselling for wasn't anything to do with being non-binary, and they just happened to mention it. The council stopped it there and then, and they weren't allowed to use that service anymore. We've had people being turned down for rehab because they say they're too complex. We don't know how to deal with people, and it's realising with trans non-binary, yes, there are uniquenesses to us, which are, you know, that we go through, but also we're just human beings, and actually we have the right to access services as anyone else. And actually, it's about speaking to the person and finding out what they want. Because some trans and non-binary people don't want to go through trans, non-binary or LGBT services. It's a small world as well. Well, I don't want to go there because I'm going to know people in there. So they do want to access the non sort of trans and non-binary services. So it's about having conversations with us, finding out what we want, because not everything is related to be trans and non-binary, and some of it is. You know, we know there is massive drug and alcohol use within the trans non-binary community. There is massive, you know, and it has been getting worse lately. You know, you can't really look on social media or the news without something about trans, especially trans women, being on there. You know, and it's relentless sometimes to have your community all the time. I just want to get on with life. You know, I just want to be me. And you know, when we did our research, 61.4% of people who said they had problems with drug and alcohol use said they had problems accessing services. You know, and that's a massive number. And you know, we can't, from running Trans Sober, we know that people just go, well, I don't want to go there because I'm just going to get misgendered. You know, I'm not going to be able to use the toilet. And it's simple things like that would just pick people off. You know, and we all have the right to be sober, you know, and to live a fun fulfilled life. And, you know, that's why I set Transsober up and I run Transsober, is to help people connect. But obviously we are just a peer support service. And we know that people who come and connect with us need more structured service. You know, they do need, you have to, especially with some drug use, alcohol use, you have to detox safely. You know, you need more than peer support. So it's good that we can work with services, and we can, so actually we know that they're a good service. You know, they have got workers that understand, you know, and work with us and them at the same time and overlap. So you can have your community and you can have your more structured drug and alcohol support that you need. Because, yeah, as I was just saying, it is really, it's complex. You know, no one, I think, has, when we have drug and alcohol problems, you really, really want to get sober. And sometimes you need help to do that. And that help can come in many, many ways, shapes and formats. And we've had some people come for our services that have gone through drug and alcohol services, and it's been amazing, you know, and they've just been, it just hasn't been an issue. It hasn't even come up that I'm trans, you know, I've just gone there as a normal person and it's been amazing. We've had other people that, you know, they've had their counselling stopped, you know, just because they flippantly mentioned that they were non-binary. We've had people turned down from rehabs because they were changed, and sadly that person passed away because they didn't get into rehab in time because they were too complex, because they were trans, you know. And it's really good that to see services reaching out to us and saying, you know, how can we be more inclusive, you know, and Darren's spoken about this, about having visibility and representation, you know, on your but it not being tokenistic, it actually being followed through. There's no point just wearing a rainbow lanyard if you don't know how to support that person, you know. And Ben's spoken about it as well, is having awareness of things that go on within our communities, and, you know, the types of drugs. And if someone is off on holiday, that there is someone else there who is able to do that work, you know, or to say that to that person, that come in, use the services, but the person that specializes in that is on holiday at the moment, so we'll hold you for now, and then when they're back, you know, if you want to, you can transfer over to that part. And, you know, I think especially with the trans and non-binary community as well, there's a lot of fear that obviously if people don't like to use drug and alcohol services and sometimes mental health services, because you are fearful that you won't get your transition. If you say you won't be able to have surgery, you won't get your hormones, because they would say, well, you need to deal with this first. And actually, for a lot of people, once we can become ourselves and we can get the medication that we need and we can start living authentically, then we're less likely to have the drug and alcohol problems. You know, for some people within the community, and I know some of my drug and alcohol use was down to, I was never able to be myself. I was always hiding some part of myself and I couldn't be authentic, you know. When I gave up drugs and alcohol, I personally saved the money to be able to do my transition in privately, and I felt I didn't need the drugs and alcohol as much because I am myself now. I am who I always been, you know. So to say to people, well, you can't transition because you've got a drug and alcohol problem, it's actually that transitioning is what's going to help them, you know. We get, again, especially where I'm from in Brighton and stuff, you've got mental health. If you say you've got drug and alcohol problems, you can't get mental health support. If you say you've got mental health, you can't get drug and alcohol support. The services don't work together collaboratively a lot of the time. And then when you add in being trans or non-binary, genderqueer, on top of that, you have all of these services that just say, well, we can't work with you. When actually you need all of these services to work collaboratively together to be able to help and support you. Because it isn't just, generally, it's just not one thing, you know, that we've all got very complex lives with lots of different things, you know, going on. So there could be, you know, lots of different things that you need to work on, and services need to work a lot more intersectionally and not just see and be more inclusive, You know, the fact that someone doesn't go engage with drug and alcohol services because they know they're not going to be able to go to the toilet when they go there is, you know, it's just ridiculous, really, that people can't get the support that they need, or they're just going to be, they're worried that they're going to be misgendered. You know, it's whatever people's feelings are around trans and non-binary people, that shouldn't come into if you're working with them within a drug and alcohol space. You know, they should be treated as a human, respected as of what they want, and how they would like to sort of lead their recovery, to be able to support them, and then they able to use other services as well. Yeah, so I mean, I'm just really passionate about sharing my story, helping and supporting the trans, non-binary, genderqueer, and wider LGBTQ community in having safe access to drug and alcohol services, being able to live their authentic selves, sober and happy, and realize that actually there is more to life than drugs and alcohol. You can have fun and enjoy life without drugs and alcohol, and you can have your community and recovery at the same time. And so, as I said, as trans sober, I just try my best to share my story, connect people, we do, as I said, we've done sober clubbing. We recently did a wellbeing day out at the Stammer sauna where we had a massage therapist. We teamed up with Pathways to Health, which is a local charity that does ear acupuncture for people with mental health and drug and alcohol problems. We've gone to the theatre. We do all sorts of things. So it is showing people that being sober doesn't have to be dull and boring, and you can connect with other sober people from your community and actually live your authentic self and enjoy life. Yeah, and I think that, and I'm always happy to ask people's questions, because people do have lots of questions generally around this. But as I said, it's just to remember that everyone is a human being and everyone deserves to have a fulfilling life. Whether you agree with that life or not, that's not you. It's not harming you. You know, it's not hard for us to be able, trans people to be able to get sober and live happy. And yeah, I hope that's okay.
That's amazing, Vernon. Thanks ever so much. I completely echo what Vern says about the research on their website. I love to read research papers, but I've got an AI app to simplify it, most of them, because they are in academic waffle that I do not understand. But on the Trans Sober website, it is very easy, simple to understand, and really simply broken down into facts and figures, which is great. And also, you mentioned about, you know, when I started in my role, I was adamant that I didn't want to remove LGBTQ plus people to a different part of our service. I wanted it to be an add-on to the general service that they would receive. So they get the general drug and alcohol service and treatment, but my LGBTQ support is an add-on to that. So we're not doing anything separate to the main treatment pathways or anything. It's just an added thing, and that's what I think anyway works really well, that you're not removing people and having specific LGBT groups that you can only attend that group. You know, that's an add-on service where you can be yourself and open and explore a bit more about your internalized homophobia, maybe, or any other of the other things that were mentioned. And doing focus groups, asking people what they want. You know, Ben's mentioned this, asking the clients what they want. It's huge. You know, there's no point in us sitting there. I would have no idea what a trans person wants from our service and what added support they need. So we did a focus group in Canterbury a couple of months ago, and I'm thankful and grateful to Forward Now and to a trans member of staff of ours, who are now setting up a trans specific support group that will be on top of our regular support, you know. And it's simple little things that you can implement. But if the representation is there within your organisation, that's the key. That is the key, I think.
Yeah, and I think, sorry, there's one important thing to say as well. It's again, it's about what I've said is giving people that choice, but also recognizing, and it's great to hear you're setting up a trans non-binary group, because there is transphobia within LGBT themselves, you know, and it is recognizing that as well, and making sure that just because it's an LGBT group doesn't mean it's not going to have transphobia in it, or non-binary is not going to be recognized and stuff like that. And so it's about, if you're running these groups, to make sure that they are truly inclusive.
Yeah, it's hugely important. Thanks ever so much, Vern. We've got plenty of time for Q&A, so if anybody's got any more questions, we've got 3 in the chat already, but if anyone's got any questions, feel free to pop them in the Q&A, or raise a hand. I think we'll be able to do that as well. So we've got a question here. I'm going to open this up to everyone. Somebody working in a gambling support service and has created Scotland's first recovery group. One big hurdle we face with gambling generally is lack of awareness. This seems especially true for the LGBT plus people experiencing gambling harms. One, if you come across gambling before in your work and how you feel it compares to substance use or alcohol.
I'm happy to come in if that's I guess it's a really interesting point that's made, and I think, as is sadly the case on a lot of these fronts, said the data isn't there, in the sense of that, said sadly research has been very limited. I mean, I think anecdotally what we do know is that obviously kind of those neural pathways, kind of what that is satiating, is very similar for many people. That correlation with neurodiversity, which again we know is very similar for LGBTQ plus people, or even more prevalent in LGBTQ plus communities, means we would expect to see, or there would be real similarity in terms of kind of the risks there and the need. But again, I think kind of the stereotypical view that people have of what gambling looks like, expected behaviors, who that cohort looks like, traditionally has not included LGBTQ plus people more generally. And then because we don't have the data to show the need, there's not the funding, and you end up in this constant cycle then, isn't it, kind of people being invisible. So yeah, I think broadly speaking, so it is definitely, we anecdotally see it within our services than LGBTQ plus people, but it does still seem to be quite like a hidden topic or discussion, or they're seen very separately, again, isn't it, rather than like this all sits as part of like a wider picture of people that are responding to traumas that they've experienced, and addiction is a route through that. So
absolutely, and I agree. You know, I think more research needs to be done into it. But I think if you're setting up a support group of any form, whether it's substance use, gambling, mental health, having diverse groups, and people will come if you show that the support is there, and that there's always a need for diverse groups, whether it's ethnic minority groups or people from the LGBTQ plus communities, setting up support groups for them. People will come if it's done well. Kate, I think this one's aimed to you. Can with you services be accessed nationally, or is it a postcode lottery? And yeah, I kind of know that one.
Yeah, exactly. I'm sure like lots of the providers. So our web chat service is available to anybody, regardless of where you're based in the country. Our operating hours are on our website. We're sadly not quite 24 hours because we don't have the funding to be able to do that, but we are 7 days a week with slightly different days, times in the weekend. In terms of kind of local in-person service, it is based upon who we are commissioned, where we are commissioned to do so. So again, what I would say, if it's useful to anybody, if you go on our website, there is like, you can just put a postcode in, it will tell you if it's with you, and or if it's anybody else in the sector as well, to help you find that local provider that is available to you.
And yeah, that's the same for us. Well, our web chat's open for anyone up and down the country, and it depends where we are as forward, where we're commissioned. I know a lot of the services, especially services next door to each other, work really closely with each other. Forward Trust covers East Kent, and CGL, Change Grow Live, cover West Kent, and we're constantly looking at our services and speaking with each other to make sure we mirror the services. So, you know, we work very closely with one another, and to make sure it's kind of the same up and down wherever you go. One here, Vern, probably towards you. An organisation recently made their new female rehab space trans exclusionary, in no small part to the anti-trans legislation. What recommendations do you have to make sure trans people can still be included? What can organisations do within the law? And finally, how can organisations take a stand to given the current situation? That's a big one.
It is a big one, and you know, I can't particularly fully answer that, because I'm just a peer support worker. I just do this. I'm just a volunteer with a learning disability, and stuff that likes to do stuff. But as we have spoken about, is we're going to see a lot more of this since this High Court ruling. A lot more. It was there before. It's going to become a lot worse. It is going to be that there isn't anywhere for trans people to go, because they can't go into this service, they can't go into that service. So it is doing your best as a service to make sure your services are as inclusionary as you can make them, and treating people as human beings, as people, having the LGBT groups or the trans and non-binary groups as well. In addition, I think we're just going to have to see where it goes. At the moment, I think, as I understand it, there is still some up and down with where the law sits, and there's all sorts of court cases going on, with other services challenging this decision, and stuff. So yeah, it's a really, I'm not going to lie, it's a really difficult one. You do have to stick within the things, but you just have to do the best you can. Make sure, again, what's really important is having representation within your staff, and your workforce and your volunteers as well. And yeah, just support people the best you can within it. And I think we're just going to have to see how it goes. But I think it is going to get worse. We've seen an increase in people wanting to support trans sober. We've actually had quite a lot of people relapsing, because of what's happened. We had someone a couple of weeks ago that had been sober for 12 years, and was then banned from the support group that they've been going to for about 5 or 6 years, because of this new ruling. And they relapsed, so we are getting a lot more of it, and we just have to be good people and do the best we can.
It's a really scary kind of time, and kind of off the back of that, I've noticed that I obviously with Forward go to a lot of Pride events, and this last year the organisers have said how much funding has been pulled for Pride events, from local organisations and national organisations who help support local events, and they're then having to charge people like ourselves who are making a difference in people's lives. They're having to charge us more to attend these things, and I fear that representation is kind of going backwards at the moment, and it's a bit of a worrying time. So yeah, just support your clients. Trans Sober website has got some awesome information, but making yourself visible as much as possible. And as Vernon said, get staff representation. When we've got staff representation, we can push the case further to commissioners and to other areas that this is what we need. This is what we're trying to do to support our clients.
And just sort of remembering as well, if you work within a service that is referring people to rehabs and stuff, do your research beforehand. Mm-hmm. Make sure that service is going to, because as I said, we've had a person die because they couldn't get into the local rehab because it was too complex, and this was before the court ruling, so do your research first, because that's only going to be more damaging to that person if you refer them to a rehab that is not going to take them. And then you have to say, sorry, so, there are mixed rehabs out there, that aren't gender specific and stuff. So make sure you do your research stuff, so you're not just adding more trauma onto people, and be, I think it's also important just to be open and honest with people as well. But yeah, and just, there's no point referring a trans woman to a service that isn't going to take, and that's just going to be more damaging to that person. So, it's about having them conversations saying, this isn't right, but this is how it is. So we need to look at the alternative, and let's find that alternative ASAP to support you, rather than just going, well, they can't go to rehabs, so we're not going to work with them.
Absolutely. Ben, do you want to come in?
Yeah, I did actually. On the back end of that, it's a really interesting conversation starter. It's all very difficult time for lots of people. Now, trans siblings are really feeling it currently. And I know through sending clients to different treatment centres, I made some good inroads to various treatment centres across the country that do have a very different stance to what we're hearing. It's about doing your homework, doing the legwork, understanding the safe spaces where you can send your clients to, whether it's an MSM person, a man that has sex with men, or a trans. Do your homework, call the rehab, do a recce, go and have a look, go and talk to the admissions managers, all the things that you need to do in order to ensure that you're sending your clients to the safest spaces. Because there are some amazing smaller rehabs that really still want to make a huge difference, irrespective to the negative viewpoint that we're hearing constantly. There are some still stars and some brilliance happening up and down the country. So all is not lost. It could all feel quite dark a lot of the time, but I know there are some brilliant places doing some amazing things, and it's just about, I'd add to that if that's all right.
Absolutely, yeah, and it's like you say, it might take a little bit of extra work, doing a little bit of extra research, but there are some amazing rehab facilities up and down the country. Just a little comment here. It's a real joy to listen to this webinar where no one used the label addict. You guys really understand stigma. I spoke about this in the last webinar. I don't identify myself as an addict or an alcoholic. I'll never use those terms. I understand that people within certain fellowship groups and what have you do, but I don't like the term substance misuse either. I find misuse, no, I used with intent and with purpose, and it kept me alive at the end of the day. Do you know what I mean? For years. And I'm not sure how you misuse heroin or cocaine or anything, but I understand that people do use those terms. So I think what's great about the Anti-Stigma Network is that everyone's just comfortable with using whatever language they're comfortable with, and trying to break the stigma that surrounds addiction as a whole, which is great. Vernon, another one for you, asking about reaching out to young people affected by alcohol and substance use in trans community, so younger people.
Yeah, I think that's really important, isn't it? If we can also catch people early, not catch people early, but support people sort of early. As again, I think we're going to see, and we are seeing, a higher majority of trans, non-binary, genderqueer youths using drugs and alcohol, because, especially people that come from smaller places without representation, without communities. So again, working with youth services, making sure they're I mean, we're not actually a youth service, but we have done bits of work with some youth services, and I've done talks to parents of youth services. And I think it's someone that comes to us as the older generation is being visible and showing the younger generation that actually it is going to be okay. It's hard. It's not an easy life being trans or non-binary. I don't think it's a life that anyone would particularly choose if they could. But, this is just how we are, and actually showing to them, it's hard, but it is okay. And actually we can live without drugs and alcohol, and having the services and the support groups and the places to go in it. And some of that comes down to the cut in youth services over so many years, and LGBT youth services, but it is having representation, supporting them and showing them, you can be your authentic self and it's okay. And drugs and alcohol, don't have to be part of that.
Excellent. Thanks, Van. Kate.
Yeah, just like a comment a bit. So with you, we're very lucky to run some young people services, and we do see like an increasing number of people accessing those services identifying as trans, non-binary, which is really positive in the sense of that they're coming through and they're getting that support early. But we're also seeing, and I think it's a recurring theme, isn't it? It's about like knowledge is power. Training isn't necessarily everything, in the sense of like it's not sit in a room and learn these words, is it? But I think actually being live to the issues for young trans non-binary people right now is so powerful. And like it sadly is such a moving field. Like I said, with each new headline, you're like, it feels like something's different. But actually, especially for young people, that the puberty blocker ban is enormous. That's changed the landscape for many trans non-binary young people, and that's really scary. It's terrifying. And for their family members, what legal recognition looks like for non-binary people is obviously complete zero in this country. So feeling kind of erased. And again, I think it's that the understanding of nuance with working with those young people and their relationships with their families. And I know I spoke about it earlier, but especially in terms of those risks of outing young people, especially for trans and non-binary people. If you are in a multi-agency setting, just really thinking about who knows what consent, and again, like putting it in the hands of that young person. I think so often with young people in general, isn't it, we take a very paternalistic view rather than being like, they're still the expert in their own experience. And I think we compound that a lot when working with trans non-binary young people. For some reason, we think there are like really way more levels of safeguarding required rather than actually just being like, you're just another young person in front of me. Tell me what you need. Let me refer to you the way it works, and we'll navigate the rest of it together. But again, I think it's leaning into what we don't know. And I think at the moment, a lot of people are scared of getting it wrong and scared of kind of saying something that feels controversial, rather than saying we all just want to help people to live their best lives. Like Vern said, like we just all deserve to be happy, don't we? So if we lean into that, hopefully we're all doing the right thing, even if we don't have the perfect words at the time. But I think it's about confronting it head on and saying, like, we are seeing this coming more and more through our young people's services. We've got to get on the front foot and find a way to support these people better.
Absolutely. Thank you. And also I know here in East Kent, we have the BU project, which is run under the Porchlight banner, which is a local homeless support charity, and they support young LGBTQ people from the ages of 8 upwards. As well as their families. So, I mean, you can have a Google of the BU project in Kent, and no doubt they'll have links to similar services across the UK. Got one here. I'm a recovery worker in prison. Thank you for the talk today. If I wanted to learn a bit more about how to work with people from the LGBTQIA+ communities, where can I look for resources, reading material, or any further training? I'm more than happy to be contacted. You can go to the Forward Trust website, and under the EDI banner, you'll see some of our work on the LGBTQ communities. My email address is on there. But also, I'm going to a couple of Pride prison events over the next couple of months, and Bent Bars is a really good resource. Not only do they do like a pen pal service for prisoners, but they also support staff within prisons supporting the LGBTQ+ community. So Bent Bars is a really good source of information. I don't know if anyone else has got any more information on that at all.
I'm happy to also share like a range of links. It's a really mixed bag, and as we know, satellite training a lot of the time can be quite expensive, but there are some amazing organizations like Gendered Intelligence, for example, a lot of like local smaller community kind of groups as well, where I think will quite often be your best road in. But I'm definitely happy to share a bit of like I've got like a reading, watching, listening list, because I think also sometimes it's like stories are way more powerful actually, aren't they, than kind of they're being sat in a room for an hour and told what the right thing to do is. So yeah, I can share that after today if that's useful as well.
Perfect, thank you. And that is Bent Bars, BENT, Bent Bars, not Ben. It's my common English over here. I don't know if anyone's got any more questions. We've just got a couple of comments here. We're going backwards, and this should not be happening today. Nobody should be refused service or support. As Vernon said, we are all human beings. And I think that's, one of the key takeaways. We're not, otherworldly or anything. We're just a human being seeking some support. And that's all we want to be treated like, and having a basic knowledge of understanding of the quirks, if you will, of our communities and the specific needs is huge. So yeah, I think there's a lot of work to do in a lot of organisations, but that's not to take away, obviously, the amazing work that is being done and up and down the country. And we do hear time and time again of people receiving amazing treatment. And as I did myself when I went to Forward nearly 7 years ago, coming in for Forward, we just it's constantly evolving the work that needs doing, and what will work here down in East Kent will be certainly different to central London, to Brighton, to the northeast of Scotland. You have to look at the communities on your doorsteps and make your service for them. So have we got any more questions? First and foremost, human beings, keep talking. The Equality Network delivers training in Scotland and is reasonably priced or free, I think, in some situations. Thank you for that. Don't know if anybody, Ben, Vern or Kate, if you've got any other words you wanted to say.
I guess just to say that it's great to see people are taking the time out to attend. And I think, like everybody said, it's that thing that it is vital that LGBTQ+ people's voices are at the centre of the conversation. That whole thing isn't of like nothing about us without us. but also sadly it's a numbers game. Do you know what I mean? 94% of the population do not identify as LGBTQ+. Therefore, it's the straight cis people that we really need to kind of lean into that conversation and to be like, I do need to learn more and I could support people better. And I think sometimes it's just like accepting a bit of that fragility sometimes, isn't it? And reaching out and being like, yeah, what can I learn? Who can I talk to? And just taking that out of today and out of Pride Month as well. We said of it, it's not just 1 month of the year or 1 day of the year, isn't it? Of the inclusion applies to everybody all of the time, and that's a way of doing rather than like one action that we have.
Absolutely, thanks, Kate.
I think also it's about, you know, coming along to these things is fantastic and it's great to see so many people here, but it's also putting that into practice. And what Darren said, talking about different areas will be different. So it is engaging with the local community people from the area you're from, finding out what they want, putting things into practice. And Kate said, you know, it's, oh yeah, we're not just trans, non-binary, LGBT like for 1 month or 2 months of the year. You know, this is our lives. And no matter what your perspective is on our life, is actually, if we're coming into services, we should be treated exactly the same as everyone else. And that desire to help people who need help and support around drugs and alcohol to get that should be the first and foremost thing. And you can always work with someone as a human being. You might not be able to support them around some of the other stuff. They go, you know, you can't change a 5-6 year waiting list to be able to get to the gender service. But what you can do is say, we're actually going to treat you as the person you are. We're going to treat you with dignity and respect, and you're going to be able to use our services, and we're going to help you through that time, you know.
Thanks, Ben. Thanks very much.
I'd also like to add, even if you aren't seeing people come through the front door of your services that are hugely identified as LGBTQIA+, and or are involved in crimes exclusively in LGBTQIA+ substances, don't think they're not being used in the area where you work. Quite simply, people won't access services if they don't feel heard or understood, or don't feel they're going to be heard or understood in any capacity. That's scratching the surface a little bit, doing some research, understanding who is on your doorstep, like what you said, Darren, and really understanding the demographic of who might need the support. When we began to do it, the organisation I was at previously, the flood opened, and it was a small seaside town on the southwest of the coast, southwest of the country, on the coast of the country. So yeah, there are lots of people that need support that don't know where to go, and we just need to keep moving the conversation to ensure everyone's voice is. Thanks for having me.
Thanks ever so much. Thanks, Ben, Kate, and Vern. This has been a really good session. Thanks again. Thanks for everyone turning up. We have got the link to the feedback form. If everyone wouldn't mind just doing a quick feedback, it'll only take a minute or two to do the feedback form. It really helps us enhance our webinars going forward and make sure we're doing things right and what we can improve on. The recording will be up on the Anti-Stigma Network YouTube site within a couple of days, and more information on future webinars will be on the Anti-Stigma Network website. Thanks ever so much for coming, everybody, and thanks to our speakers again. Thank you.